within the tax world, we pretty much had the same goals as what is happening right now. We essentially wanted to transform the international tax system, and particularly to transform the governance of international taxation. And so the first strategy is really about understanding who the key stakeholders are within the UN process. Now, with regard to African presentation, this will be, of course, the permanent representatives from the missions, the permanent missions to the UN, which are based in New York, and also the people who are the technical support for such permanent representatives. And this is from the capital. So this will be, of course, the national treasuries. And then, of course, the other strategy is ensuring that there's high-level political support for what it is that we're trying to do. The other stakeholders are other developing countries like the LATAM region, the Asian region, amongst others. And then, of course, we have the G20 and G7 countries who are mostly developed countries or at the very least emerging economies. So some of the strategies that we used and some of the strategies that I think are necessary is, number one, securing high-level political support for a UN Framework Convention on Sovereign Debt. So for the international tax process, this began with the high-level panel report on illicit financial flows. And this was a report that was commissioned by the African Union as well as UNECA back in 2015. It's popularly known as the Thabo Mbeki report. And essentially, this report put issues that have to do with international tax, with commercially related illicit financial flows on the map of the continent. It made it a continental level strategy and plan. And I know this something similar has happened, of course, with debt. And then the other very important strategy was rallying the support of permanent representatives from permanent missions. It was very necessary to sit with members of the African group and sort of discuss the importance of this and why this needs to be top priority, considering that permanent representatives have very many issues that they deal with at the UN level. And then finally, it was also to rally also the technical support for delegations that will be pretty much leading this work. And of course, doing our best to secure financial resources for the process. Now, I will not go into the challenges, but I can briefly talk about the challenges that we faced in this strategy. The first one, of course, was external efforts to weaken the African group position, as well as the solidarity of the African group and the G77. And I think the other challenge, of course, was that sometimes there's a conflict of interest even amongst the African group and the G20 and the African group because of commitments that they have towards other sort of groupings. So for instance, particularly within the tax world, the challenge that we had was that some members of the African group and some members of the G77 are members of the G20. And so members of the G20 were averse towards the development of a UN convention, of a UN Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation. The other challenge, and I think that's a similar challenge that we face within debt, because we are facing an issue of a lack of solidarity with the G77, particularly with regard to China. So that's something that is definitely a problem. I think the other issue is that human and financial resources can sometimes be inadequate. So for instance, the UN Secretariat is big, and it doesn't just focus on one issue. And so it's been a struggle, to be quite honest, and it still is a struggle to ensure that the Secretariat has adequate human and financial resources to essentially undertake a whole new process. So the other strategy that we also had to adapt as civil society organizations is to really rally for the support for contributions towards the budget for this particular process to take place. The other major challenge that we have faced and which we've learned from is a lack of inadequate coordination between experts and diplomats. Diplomats are very familiar with UN processes, they're familiar with the strategies that work, they are seasoned. And so if we don't have that coordination and cooperation between experts as well as diplomats, we get to have a situation where you can clearly see that there's a disconnect between the capital and the missions, and that becomes problematic since a country won't be able to be as strong on their position if they in comparison to what they would have been if those two entities were working closely together.